Dear friends, it's great that you are here. We decided today is very special day, a very special day in the history of Ukraine, but it's important day for all the world. And we decided today just to organize this gathering with this title, 1 year, stay in the fight. By the way, don't be envy everybody who is ready to wear this similar sweater you will get this from our team. You will get this sweater with a very important message. 1 year, stay in the fight. Of course, Ukrainians will stay in the fight. Very important that our friends, all your countries, your nations, your great people, thank you very much, of course, for your support, but also you will come home and you will say to all your people, to your countries, to your politicians, stay in the fight, because we need your support, we need weapon as fast as possible, and we have to win as fast as possible. This gathering is very informal. This is just an idea behind just networking, exchange. We have to stay together today. That's why very informal, open discussion, open microphone, very interactive. Please welcome to our discussion, brainstorming, and just also like to explain to you that it's for us great honor that exactly on the same level, just next big room. That's why we are in this much smaller room. In the big room, later today, our Commander-in-Chief, President Zelensky, will gather his press conference with a few hundreds journalists from around the world. That's why we're here. He will be there. For us, it's also will be important to feel we are together. Okay, dear friends, let's start our very informal gathering, our discussion. We'll talk about what we are fighting for. We'll talk about importance of this year, what this year means for the history of Ukraine, for the future of all civilization, and many other topics. Okay, I wish us really great success. Let's stay in fight together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed,
And of
Victor.
course, I didn't say that our master of ceremony, our great friend, she came to Kyiv especially just for this day. Gillian Tett, thank you very much. Thank you that you are here, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Victor. And I did indeed come here just overnight for today to take part in this event, because I do believe very strongly that it is very important for the wider community to be aware of what is currently happening and the thoughts of the Ukrainian leadership. I should explain, my name's Gillian Tett. I'm the co-chair of the editorial board of the Financial Times. I've been coming to Ukraine for many years. I did my PhD formerly in the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. And for that reason, I care very passionately about what is happening today and the fight. I've just been taught by Olha to say Vitayu Dobryu Ranku. Apologies if my accent is not correct, but I say I'm just learning Ukrainian right now. So we're going to be having an informal discussion, as Victor has just said, about what is happening, what is going to happen in the next year, and what Ukraine needs. We have an amazing panel to talk about this. I think known to most of you, Olha Stefanishyna, who's the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. Bob Seeley at the end, who is a fellow Brit from the House of Commons. He's member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Alexander Vershbow, who's a distinguished fellow of the Atlantic Council, former deputy head of NATO and former ambassador to Russia. And Oleksiy Danilov, who is a secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. And we're talking about Ukraine, obviously, at a very symbolic moment, given that we are on the anniversary of Russia's invasion. And I thought I'd start by reading out an intelligence update that the British military put out this morning, which I think frames it rather well. They point out that, quote, since 2014, Russia's strategic goal in Ukraine has been consistent: to control its neighbor. Between 2014 and 2021, the British military thinks, it pursued this objective through subversion, by fomenting an undeclared war in the Donbass and by annexing Crimea. And then, of course, a year ago, it pivoted to a new approach, which was direct invasion. Now, the significant thing is, the British intelligence thinks that in recent weeks, I'm reading, Russia has likely changed its approach again. Its campaign now likely primarily seeks to degrade the Ukrainian military rather than being focused on seizing substantial new territory. The Russian leadership is likely pursuing a long-term operation where they bank that Russia's advantages in population and resources will eventually exhaust Ukraine. Russia, in other words, is trying to exhaust Ukraine and exhaust the West. So the question is, will they succeed? Perhaps I can start with you, Olha, and ask you, how do you assess this view of where we are now in this war, in this struggle, and how much confidence do you have that Russia will not exhaust Ukraine and the West?
Well, thank you so much. I want to start with the feeling I personally had in the morning today when I woke up on the 24th of February. And not this day, not any other day could be compared with the 24th of February 2022. This was the moment from which many of Ukrainian people died. Dozens and dozens are missing or forcefully displaced from the territory of Ukraine. Hundreds of buildings has been damaged. These are the numbers, but these are every case we faced on a daily basis in Ukraine. From the day one, on 24th of February 2022, there were a lot of disappointment. Can you imagine, as the Deputy Prime Minister for EU NATO Affairs, I was calling and dialing nearly every number I had in my phone book to reach the leaders, the ministers, everybody I could, to get additional military support, to inform of what is happening. And there has been both a lot of gratitude, but also a lot of frustration. But now, a year after the full-scale aggression, none of those who disappoint us in these first days are disappointing us now. The whole world stands with us. You've seen the voting for the UN resolution. We understand that the whole world wants to be on the right side of the history. And every time we're asking for tanks, for long-range artillery, for jet, we never hear no. We just see the delays in time. But everyone knows that even without jets, without tanks, or without long-range artillery, Ukrainians will fight. Ukrainians will fight with their bare hands, dying. So we are asking weapons to save our soldiers, to save our lives. And I think this is the baseline of answer to your question, that there is actually no way for Ukraine's victory not to come. There's no option of not supporting Ukraine. There's no option of not helping Ukraine to survive throughout the war financially and economically. But the only question which is unsolved now, when we will win. And what is perfectly suiting Russian narrative and Russian strategic goal is any delays, any prolongation, or any hesitation we're taking, whether in terms of making sure our military, economical, financial, political needs are ensured. Any hesitation on setting up the special tribunal and holding Russia accountable, on seizure of Russian assets, serves Russian goal. Russians, unfortunately, have a long experience of trying to control their neighbors, to get control over the territories, to start the wars. And they know perfectly well that the exhaustion is the best strategy when you can't win. This is confirmed not only by the war we're sitting in right now. This is the historical experience they have. The agenda we are moving throughout the world is that the democratic world, who is also basically paying by crises, by many things for this aggression, and Ukraine is paying by its lives, should held the control over this file. That's why the 10 points peace plan of the president has been suggested. That's why the special tribunal has been initiated. That's why the Rammstein format has been launched, but also that's why all 27 EU leaders supported granting Ukraine candidate status, understanding that there's only one way this war could be over, was the victory of Ukraine, with the Ukraine being part of European Union and hopefully part of NATO.
Well, thank you. I'd like to now turn to Bob and ask him, from the perspective of the British Parliament and the government, I mean, first of all, would you agree with the military assessment by the British Army that we've gone through these three phases of first subversion, a war of subversion, then a direct war of invasion, and now a war of exhaustion or attrition, depending which word you want to use? Would you agree with that? And if so, what can we do to prevent Russia winning the war of exhaustion?
I wouldn't entirely agree, because I would trace the beginning of this war a little bit further back. Like you, Gillian, I did a PhD rather later. I finished it only a couple of years ago. My PhD was on what is Russian warfare in relation to Ukraine. And for me, the Ukrainian war started after the Orange Revolution. And I think at that point, the evidence suggests, if you look at Russian behavior in Ukraine, the information war, the business war, the economic war, the informational, the subversion war, the hollowing out of Ukrainian institutions, the corruption, which was encouraged by the Russian state. I think from 2005, Putin said, I want Ukraine back. And that period of, we call it hybrid war, but it was effectively a non-military form of conflict, happened until the collapse of the Yanukovych government. And arguably, it was the most successful period of conflict that Russia had here, because frankly, the Russians weren't that far off succeeding. Maidan, the revolution of dignity, happened. The Yanukovych regime collapsed, and at that point, Putin then kicked in phase two, which was the paramilitary struggle of the kind of which we've seen in Transnistria, we saw in Abkhazia, etc., etc. That didn't work either, although that helped remarkably the formation of a modern political Ukrainian state. So people say war has formed Ukrainian state, yes, but actually the critical point was 2014 for me, not 2022. And after that failed, then you had the third phase, which was the current conventional war. Now, you can argue phase 4 is attritional, but actually what we've had is a conventional war from 2022, and Russia is now relearning the tools of its hybrid, its total war. If you look at Russian theory of war, characteristic number one is the unification of military and non-military tools. It's a form of total war, as argued actually by General Ludendorff, for those people who remember their German military theory shortly at the end of World War I. So I think that's where we are when it comes to phases of war. We're in a third conventional stroke hybrid phase now, after 2005, 2014, 2022. That's how I would phase this conflict.
Right. And just to quickly, before I turn to Sandy, I mean, do you think that the British government has a stomach for continued fight to prevent exhaustion from winning?
I'd say up to a point, and I'd say it's not so much the Brits, because they are emotionally and in relation to our size, probably Ukraine's biggest backers. Look, I love this country, and I lived here from 90 to 95, so I'm going to be honest in my opinions, and that may mean I argue with some Ukrainians here who are, and I don't blame them, this is a one-year anniversary, this is an incredibly emotional time. I'm going to be trying to be rational rather than emotional. If Ukraine doesn't win this year, some of its Western backers are going to start thinking, what is option B?
Right.
So the best thing that we can do, the morally right thing to do, is to give Ukraine the tools to finish the job. It's also the least dangerous thing to do, because the longer this war goes on, the more dangerous it is. But there is absolutely no guarantee that the Ukrainians will win. And the Kharkiv-style collapse that we saw in the Kharkiv front in September, when we were here for the last summit, that is unlikely to happen again, because the Russians have defense in depth. And just on that point, to sum up, it is important to understand what the Russians are trying, what the Russian regime is trying to do. Firstly, hold that line. If you hold enough Ukrainian territory for long enough, possession is 9/10 of the law, as we say in an English phrase, it becomes increasingly difficult. make life difficult as possible for the Ukrainian state and Ukrainian civilians. We know that the Ukrainian economy has collapsed 30%. It's dependent on the West financially and militarily. Yes, it will continue to fight afterwards, but it becomes increasingly difficult if you haven't got the kit. And thirdly, the Kremlin badly wants to break the umbilical cord between the Western alliance and Ukraine. And if it succeeds in that, and if it succeeds in damaging it over the next year, then all bets are off. And I say that as a true friend of Ukraine, if I may.
Well, thank you, Bob. And I think basically, certainly, sorry, Victor would like to come in. Yes, please. Yeah.
Do you want my
We're gonna.
microphone?
I should stress, by the way, two things as we wait for Victor to speak. Firstly, this is indeed an informal dialogue, and so if any of you do want to jump in, I'm going to call on a number of you. Please put your hand up and do speak. And secondly, I should have said earlier, this is being conducted under Chatham House rules, which means that we're not going to quote you by name, so that we can have an honest and serious dialogue. Victor.
I like this picture which Bob painted, that Putin started this war not I think 2014, but after Orange Revolution 2005. And in this point I disagree with you, that if I will follow your logic, from my point of view, Putin started this war not later than in 2003 from the attempt to get Tuzla Peninsula. This is my opinion. It was, I think, 2003, just.
Right.
Before 2000, we both agreed before 2014.
Yes.
No, but that is very interesting, and I agree with your analysis. But as a part of, as a witness, I can tell you, I remember my meeting with Putin 2002. It was private conversation in private apartments in Kremlin. We spoke without translators in Russian, and I asked him about what, because he was a very young president. I was old president, 7 years in the office. He was only 2 years. I asked him what are the main goals for him, and he told me two things. First, to rebuild the position of Russia on the international stage. Okay, quite obvious goal for all presidents in the world. And the second, and what I remember very well, he told me, and I want to rebuild Great Russia, Velikaya Rossiya. And Great Russia means, of course, Ukraine, Belarus, Caucasus, Central Asia, etc. And I asked him, well, and it was a long conversation, I asked him, and tell me, because he was very negative opinion about Gorbachev, of course, not very good about Yeltsin. I asked him, could you tell me who are, in your opinion, the most important leaders of this great entity, Russia? And he called three names: Peter the Great, Katerina the Great, and Joseph. And what is interesting, he said Joseph Vissarionovich. He didn't say Stalin, he said Joseph Vissarionovich. And of course I start to make a joke, so I understand. I told him that you want to be number 4 on this very short list of the leaders. And I said to him, maybe it was my mistake, but if you would be number 4 on this list, you would be the only second Russian. Probably it was my mistake, but seriously speaking, in my opinion, 2002, the idea of Great Russia was Putin's dream. 2004-5, after Maidan, after Orange Revolution, it started to be a plan. After 2014 is his obsession. So we have 3 different stages of development of this understanding of Ukraine and the problem.
I think we can all agree that British intelligence was wrong.
Exactly, yeah. Bottom line is the British military intelligence was too simplistic. I think everyone knows that was Aleksander Kwasniewski, former president of Poland, just in case anyone doesn't know him, I'm sure you do, who's also the chairman of the Yes board. But I'd like to bring in Sandy at this point. Are you Sandy or Alexander? What do you prefer? I'm tempted to say Sasha, because that's...
Fine.
What, Sandy's fine?
Sasha's okay too.
Sasha or Sandy? Maybe say Sasha in this audience. Ask you, would you agree, without going back into history, would you agree that fundamentally we're now into a war of exhaustion or attrition? And how confident are you that America has a stomach to keep supporting Ukraine? Or do you think, would you agree with Bob, that if Ukraine does not win this year, we're going to face a situation where unfortunately, that umbilical cord may be severed. And I should also say, by the way, I got it wrong. We're not conducting this under Chatham House rules, apparently. We are going to be public and open. So just bear that in mind as you're speaking. Please don't censor yourself, because I think everyone needs to hear what you think, but just be aware of that.
Well, thanks very much. It's great to be here on such an important and somber. And I think that it is a pivotal moment. The next year will determine whether Ukraine is going to continue to be an independent state. Putin is clearly still trying to not just bring Ukraine under its control, but I think he ultimately has not changed his long-term objectives, even though he now knows he can't achieve them in the short and medium term. But I think he still wants to erase Ukraine and Ukrainian identity from the map. And I think that he'll only agree to a possible de-escalation and a respite, but as soon as he can regroup and rearm, he will move back to his original objectives. I think he cannot countenance the possibility of a successful Ukraine building democracy, becoming integrated in the EU and NATO. But he may, for tactical reasons, be lowering his ambitions for the short and medium term. I do agree with some of the historical points. I was ambassador to Russia in 2001 to 2005, and clearly Ukraine was already on Putin's radar. And Russia had not been inactive in the 90s either in terms of sowing separatism among Russians in Crimea. So it didn't, and of course, exploiting some of the other frozen conflicts even earlier than that. So, but the Orange Revolution was, I think, a kind of a watershed event in Putin's thinking, because he was convinced from that point forward that not only were the nations of the former Soviet Unions trying to break free, and he had to stop that, but he blamed the West for actually fomenting these kinds of popular revolts. He never has believed, never will believe, that there could be such a thing as popular protests driven by the masses from below. But where are we now? I do think that a war of exhaustion may be what Putin is hoping for, because I think right now he knows he can't win, so he's playing not to lose. And so the challenge for all of us is not to allow that to become the dominant narrative. I think with enough Western support, and that's a big qualifier, Ukraine still can win, and we have to do what's necessary in terms of arming and training Ukrainian forces, continuing to ratchet up the pressure of sanctions and other levers, but most importantly, it's weapons, improving Ukraine's potential to retake more of its territory and convince Putin that it's only going to get worse if he doesn't end this war once and for all. So trying to end the war this year should be our goal, whether or not Putin agrees with that timeline. And I think we can do it, and this event is a good way to kind of rally our spirit and send a message to Putin that he's not going to outlast us. You asked about domestic support. I think right now there is strong bipartisan support in the Congress, but there are kind of warning signs on the horizon. Of course, we have 2024 elections, and Trump is a declared candidate, and that would be quite a shift in U.S. attitudes. But I think that majority of Republicans in the Congress, particularly in the Senate, still support the strategy of the administration and of the alliance. And I think that the U.S. administration could be doing a better job in making the case why this matters. It's partly about values and freedom, but it's also about our strategic interests. We don't want Putin to get away with creating a world in which it becomes acceptable to change borders by force, to gobble up your neighbor's territory. That, I think, is the right way of framing the issue, but we're not putting enough resources into this, and we're artificially constraining what kind of capabilities we give to Ukraine. And then that, unfortunately, could lead to a longer-term stalemate. So now's the time to shed some of those constraints.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed. I must say just two things. First of all, those of you who don't follow Tucker Carlson, he gave the most extraordinary diatribe last night on American television about Ukraine. And the only thing that's more extraordinary than the comments by people like Tucker Carlson about Ukraine and Russia is the fact that you do actually have a really strikingly strong bipartisan consensus in Congress behind Ukraine. It's one of the few areas where I think that what Tucker Carlson is saying is not necessarily carrying the bulk of the Republican Party in America right now. So I do find that fascinating. The second thing I was going to say, though, is before we turn to Oleksiy Danilov, who I'd like to ask about what you think is needed, in particular from the military perspective, I can see that Bob wants to quickly jump in, and then I will turn next to Oleksiy.
Gillian, thank you. Just two things very briefly. When it comes to the war that Ukraine is facing, you're absolutely right. And there are two ideas about conventional war, especially in 1930 Soviet thinking, wars of destruction, wars of attrition. Ukraine needs to win a war this year using combined arms maneuver warfare theory. Over and above all the kit that it needs, and yes, it does need an awful lot of kit, it needs to think and act as a modern fighting unit, and that's all arms maneuverability. Against that, you've got the Russians fighting a traditional attritional war. If this becomes attritional, the Russians are more likely to win than the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians have to fight using modern thinking about warfare as well as modern kit. The other thing, very briefly, Lord Ashcroft, who's one of our parliamentarians here, has got a big poll out today being reported in some of the British newspapers, and there is a shift amongst some Trump Republicans in the sense that there's a drop in support for the Ukrainians amongst Trump Republicans, amongst Fox viewers. So there is increasingly a battle, a struggle to make sure that you keep the broad majority of support, especially in the United States, which is the strongest backer of the Ukraine by far in terms of kit, as well as some Eastern European countries such as Hungary.
Right, well, thank you. I see already we've got people in the audience who want to comment, but I would like to quickly bring in first Oleksiy Danilov to give us a perspective. As Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, how do you assess at the moment the risk of exhaustion, and what exactly do you want from the West right now to counter the risk of exhaustion?
Well, it's a strange discussion. We are referring to Putin all the time. And some things that have nothing to do with the processes, the attrition. What is this all about? We have to understand very simple things, values, for example, as a notion. What kind of values we're talking here? If freedom is a value, or human life is a value, a key value, let's talk about that. If its value is not a value, it's just the price you pay, and this is useless. We have proved that value of freedom is key for us. Is it key for the West? It's difficult for me to say, taking into account the discourse that we have now and wider. What is this all about, I'm asking? If democracy that has some key principles underpinning it, like human being, and this all being anthropocentric, you cannot rape, you cannot kill human being, it's one thing. If you come back to participation in this, well, the answer is obvious for everyone. And if presently the civilized world think that we have to defend democracy, well, we are together in this with you, and we're doing it every day. And when you were evaluating this situation as of 24th of February 2022, no intelligence had the objective snapshot of the state of our military, our country, our public, and some people after the 30th of October 2021, I had some ambassadors here knew my position, and I was arguing that we are not going to give up. We're different people, and when you united us in the same system with them in 1991, when you invited me, I picked up that book by Benedict Vershbow, which is called Moscow Petushki. I would like to give it to Monsieur Borrell. He was talking about the great Russian people yesterday. So that was 1970. It's all there in that book about the people they are. It's done by them. And we are writing our history with our own blood now. Every day on our land, in our country, we have rivers of bloodshed. And if you can see this blood and still rely upon some double standards, you have to be open about it. And here at the entrance, we had that exhibition greeting us. That exhibition should travel to all the parliaments of the world. By all means, this exhibition should be in the parliaments of the world. Whether it will reach out there, I'm not sure, because now we can see some kind of resistance, and they are trying to frame it differently or reframe it. We are living in a very difficult world indeed. We will resist. We will never give our territory to anyone. Attrition, exhaustion, exertion. Well, there's this plan B coming from the Russian Federation. They would like to bring the situation to the state of some talks to postpone the Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. They will raise all the imaginable objections and offer some kind of mix. And this mix can only be accepted by the people of Ukraine. If people of our great country will not accept this mix, things that happened in 2004, the abuse of our constitution, Putin together with some contemporaries, they actually abused our constitution, and we had the consequences of that back in 2013. We cannot give up. We cannot surrender. We have no right to do that. And if somebody is telling us about the events, on the 24th of February, when the full-scale invasion started, we were expecting it. It was just a matter of time. And now the 500 children which are in heaven, and I'm sure they're helping us there from up there. And tell me, please, who should be responsible? Has somebody to be responsible for killing 500 children in the 21st century? That's a question for everyone. Putin, who ordered killing of 500 children, should he be responsible, or should we sit at the table of negotiation with him and distribute our lands, give away this, give up that? Now, this is not the point. The point is that this person should be arrested as soon as possible and put behind bars. Face the tribunal. It's already too late. It should have happened yesterday. But yesterday, the Parliamentary Assembly of OSCE greeted the Russian delegation. And just imagine during the Second World War, the Germans entering some international forum and being welcomed like this. Such double standards turn tricky sooner or later. In 1991, somebody had decided to have a monopoly. Monopoly always means degradation whenever it happens. In 1991, the world decided there was Eurasia, and 3 countries, the Baltic states, had to be separated from that, and they gave this part of the world to Russia, all the nukes, and instead of having this triangle Kazakhstan, Russia, Ukraine, the great minds decided to give Russia that monopoly. Now we have the consequences of that monopoly arranged in 1991. Regardless of the events developing, we are going to have the following arrangement. After this war, the world is going to be difficult. I can assure you. I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time, but now we're having this special week when I think that we have to celebrate it with all the butter and cheese available. There's the saying with Russian that you can hide things which make themselves obvious. And so we have to talk like adults here, and I urge you to do that.
Thank you very much indeed for those heartfelt comments. I know that Olha wants to say something, but before I turn to Olha, I quickly want to ask you, Oleksiy, how much confidence do you have that Ukraine will get the weapons it needs? I mean, in terms of your dialogue with the international community, do you think that you are getting the weapons you need, or do you need more? And then Olha, and then I'm going to turn to the audience.
Well, you get something. So there is no deficiency. It's not impossible to get anything. The market of weapons is international and very well supplied. So it's either we get everything we need, or it's should be not a matter of getting something. It's a matter of support from all the countries which think that they are part of this coalition, and this is going to be fair. Some people arguing that we are being helped. In 1994, it was free of charge. We gave up the nuclear weapons, and we were promised that never, ever we would be attacked. In those days, hundreds of millions of dollars. We understand about the powers saved a lot of money, and save means earned, and that wasn't us. It wasn't our benefit. We were provided with the safeguards which proved dysfunctional. Let me just make this remark. In 2007, when the journalists here, this person is here from the Ukrainian Truth, Serhiy, and I told him back then, look here, my friend, the Russians are going to take away the Crimea, the Russians are going to start the war in Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. That was in 2007. I do not, it's not, it wasn't a prophecy on my part. And let me tell you what will happen now. The West are not getting ready for that. They think that they hold Russia. On the 24th, the fragmentation of Russia started. On the 2nd of March 1989, the fragmentation of the USSR started. And the Russia followed that suit. And you're not going to rely upon Putin. The processes follow totally different laws, and will follow totally different laws, and already following. And Russia in the same frontiers and will cease to exist, and it is a matter of 5 to 7 years. And we have to be very serious about this prospect, and we should not think that somebody is wiser than anybody else. Thank you.
Right, well, that's a very notable point to make. I'm sure we'll provoke more discussion in that moment. I'm going to quickly turn to Olha and then turn to the audience, because I see lots of hands wanting to comment already.
It will be a very short comment. It will be a comment on the emotion. You know, while we were having this discussion, I held this special energy with Oleksiy while we were sitting here, because this is the feeling that we had 24/7, throughout all of these years and throughout all of this year. We have a forecast fatigue. We've heard, you've heard a lot of very great decisions, like Ukraine has been granted a candidate status, Ukraine applied for NATO membership, Ukraine has been given patriots, Ukraine has received another packages of assistance. And can you imagine what was prior to these decisions were taken, what we were hearing, How impossible is that? How impossible is that to get this additional military support? How impossible is that to get another package of sanctions? How impossible is that to accumulate biggest possible financial support for our country to survive? And the lower layer you're going down in your discussion, the more impossible it becomes. And by the end of the day, we are not in the discussions. We're only running to our goal. And this is something that you have to know about us, about Ukrainians, that we can discuss, we can sit on the panels. By the end of the day, we know that we are backing up all those people who are still fighting, who are suffering, who have died, who have lost their families, the armed forces who are now in the winter not in a such comfortable situation. And because of them, we can be here. So every forecast we heard, whether from Russia or from the West, has nearly failed to be implemented. It is Ukraine which changed the world. We have changed the world, and we're sitting now in the world which has never been the same as it was before 21st of February. And we have to understand very clearly that the outcome of this war will change the world as well. And it is our agenda. It's our job to identify in which way Ukrainians sitting here know that victory is the way to change the world for better. Not only for Ukraine. We are fighting for our lives, we are fighting for our survival, but our victory is the way to be on the light side of the history. And this is the answer, we should be there. And finally, I think it's very important to say that whenever we hear hesitation or I call it pragmatic forecasts, you doubt in Ukrainians. You do not have, nobody has any illusions about Russia. Everybody thinks of them better a bit than sometimes it is. But you always doubt about Ukraine, whether you can give Ukraine this weapon, whether we can use it, whether our soldiers are trained enough, whether we can deliver on reforms needed. But look at us. We have patriots. We have all the most sophisticated armor. We are fighting, we're winning on a battlefield, we're doing the reforms and making the institutions run under the shelling. So nobody should doubt Ukraine. And if you hesitate of taking the decisions, whether yes or no, ask Ukrainian, we always have the answer here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think the story of the last year has been that certainly a year ago, on the day of the invasion, many people did doubt Ukraine and many people did expect Kyiv to fall very fast, and Ukraine has repeatedly defied the doubters and delivered surprises to the upside, which is a remarkable story in many ways. We're going to take some comments from the audience now, but before we do, I want to quickly bring in, well, I see lots of hands waving, I want to quickly bring in one person who has been at the front lines and very much on the ground as a paramedic, Yulia Payevska. And just say, would you like to tell us a few words about whether working on the ground as a paramedic with the armed forces, whether you feel that there is a sense of exhaustion, attrition, whether people are willing to keep fighting, and just say a couple of words briefly about how you came to volunteer as a paramedic, because you weren't in the armed forces before.
I'll speak Ukrainian, okay?
Please do. Please do, yes.
Okay. I'll share a story of how this is done in the battlefield. The military do their job. This is our job. We don't take it as an act of heroism. No, it's just a job the same as a janitor or street sweeper would do, and everyone who is doing this job are just happy to see that they do something right. What I could see in this
days and months, deaths, sufferings shouldn't be wasted. And these victims are not just for Ukraine, but for the entire free world, because every person of goodwill is jeopardized, is threatened, and those who aren't conscious of that, well, I'll pray God they'll never experience what we have. It's not just about values or ideas. It's about lives, because a life without freedom is worthless. The Russians would like to take our freedom away from us, and to me, this is the same as taking our lives from us. I see no difference between freedom and life. After what I've seen in those torture rooms in Donetsk, I just can't show any difference. At least Ukrainians would never agree to that. You call it war of survival. Yes, it is, but the goals of this war should be shared by all people of goodwill. I recall the time when I joined team at Military Hospital 555 in Donetsk. Now, do you want to know what I was thinking at that time? There were many wounded people, both civilians and military, and I got this flashback, of 8 years. Well, the Maidan, that's what I'm referring to. Same substance, same people, same eyes, same looks. I try to recall the faces of those who were wounded and couldn't, apart from the faces of my friends. What I could, however, recall is their cries, their pain, their suffering, and this has been going on for, well, 9 years now. We have to put an end to it. There is no one we can negotiate anything on the other side. They do not understand words. They will only succumb to force. More equipment, more air defense, more weaponry to liberate our, well, kids and women. Otherwise, I really thank the international community, the global community, all those who are standing by us will always be able to rely on us. We will be your staunch allies. We will never fail you. Don't fail us. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Yulia. I did want to get a human perspective from the front lines, because it's very important to understand what the sacrifices are on the ground and the extraordinary courage of the Ukrainians. So from the bottom of my heart, I commend you and all of those who are with you at the moment. We've only got about 30 minutes left, unfortunately. I can see many, many of you want to come in and talk. So I was going to say, I'm going to want to bring in as many people as I can into the conversation. And I will probably have to cut down the comments a little bit time-wise. But perhaps we can have a comment from Nataliya, who needs almost no introduction. Nataliya Gumenyuk, who is a co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Laboratory. And I will ask everyone speaking now to be fairly short.
So I was probably invited to give this comment as a journalist who spent a year traveling around the country and being to most of the places. And answering the question for what we fight, I of course convey the thoughts of the people. And the first would be, the worker on the steel factory in Kryvyi Rih, who say that he fights for the freedom of speech, to my surprise. And the second one for the, for the world. The mayor of the town of Ohtyrka at the early stage of the war was absolutely sure that he's fighting. His city is a frontier for the civilization, and that's what they're really, doing. And a worker in Odessa whose profession is to install the windows told me that he is fighting that nobody in Moscow would tell him what the president to choose. and the guy who usually repair TV sets and fighting now in Kharkiv is close to the Russian border, also said that he's fighting so nobody comes to him and tell how to run his household. That would be the most common thing which I usually hear. So of course it's about the freedom and democracy if we rephrase it. Which is very dear for everybody on every single level. But of course I should say that, talking later in the course of the conflict with the local community leaders, and I should say in Ukraine what a few people know that, more than 150 heads of the villages and the cities has been kidnapped, abducted at different stage. They were always, after telling that they were staying with their communities to save the lives of the people in there. So, but by this stage, I still think it's more about human lives, first of all, because if people who are killed in Kherson are killed mainly just because it's possible for Russia to do them. There is no any other sense. And also we see today that also the people who remain in the occupation in the eastern bank of Kherson, in Berdyansk, they also can be killed just for being Ukrainians. There is not anything else today. Right. So it's today more about the human lives. On the question about the, what would be the solution and what is the level of the compromise, of course the thoughts are shifting. So for instance, coming from the human rights background and writing about Crimea for many years, we were writing about Crimea as a place where there are no freedoms, where there are political persecutions. But no, it's a military zone, the platform for the further attack. So it should be liberated with different reasons. But what I understand from talking to a lot of people, the result, it would be a genuine idea that Russia won't attack Ukraine in the nearest future. The genuine, and I believe the people would understand what is genuine, because to also my surprise, would I be in the village of Zaporizhia or elsewhere, it would be usually the other way. I would hear the people first, and in the evening I would hear the president speaking. And it won't be the vice versa, that the people are repeating something which the government says. It's usually the other way. So with this call, I would say that what is expressed by the larger society. But the final way, because I'm also working on the Reckoning project, which documents the war crimes around the country. And clearly, besides everything, the peace and the victory, of course, the accountability of the perpetrators is absolutely critical for all the victims and survivors and the people we speak. And, and for them, it's not that much about individual perpetrators, but for the chain of the command and the leadership of Russia. So the tribunal, special tribunal is in fact matter for the Ukrainians. But my final thought would be with the lady, Olena Sementsova, whose husband died in attack on the Kramatorsk train station. She was there as well as a volunteer, helping people to evacuate, and in the end was bringing the body of her husband without a head, there. And she told me that, for her, it's not that much accountability. She's a religious person. She doesn't want even the punishment for the people, but for her, it's absolutely critical that something should be done, that the others' lives are not destroyed. And that's what I would speak from the Ukrainians of all range. And I hope I conveyed this message to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And you did, I have to say. As someone who speaks in America, lives in America, but is obviously British initially, there's a tremendous degree of complacency in the West about democratic values and what really matters. And Ukraine has basically forced the world to recognize why we need to fight for democracy and freedom so importantly. But I'd like to quickly turn to a couple more commentators. Andrii Melnyk, who's the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs in Ukraine. I'll come to you in just a moment. Andrii, do you want to speak? And then I see we've got two hands waving back there. But Andrii, do you want to speak first? And then we'll have... I also want to talk on Mario.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to come back to the core question that you posed at the beginning of this session. What does it mean that Ukraine shall win the war? I think that is the crucial question, and I think that we are here in the friendly circle, and we shall be able to give this answer to that question. Because if we agree, and I hope it is so, that Ukraine to win this war would mean to liberate not just Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson, but also to liberate Crimea. And thank you so much, Nataliya, for pointing out to that issue. That is something which should defined the way of dealing of our partners in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in other countries. And that would mean we should be frank with ourselves and with our societies. If we agree upon that, then it would mean that that goal shall be explained to the society in Germany, in the States, in all the countries, to get the support. And that would mean that we need not just the pace is crucial for us. I hate to hear that Ukraine shall win this year. It sounds like if it doesn't succeed, then plan B is evident, and I hate this thought. Pace is crucial. That means everything our army needs: fighter jets, long-range missiles, Navy. We need everything that our partners are able to give right now without any longer hesitation.
Right.
And second thing is amount. It's also crucial because if we think about a Lend-Lease program during the Second World War, it was like 50 billion US dollar. In today's prices, it would be like 700 billion. And if you compare to the help that Ukraine has been receiving, and we are thankful for that help, no doubt, then you see the difference. You see the difference. Germany has contributed like 3 billion plus 3 billion help in non-military terms. That means 6 billion. That would mean that each German has paid for the last war like 72 euros. That means €6 a month. My Netflix abonnement is double as expensive. So that is, everything is in the relation. And therefore, if we have common answer to that question, that Ukraine should win, that means we should liberate all the territory, and that we have to take care that a new war, a bigger war, does not really break out afterwards. We need to prevent a new war, and it's still I don't see any discussions how the post-war order should look like. That's something that we also have to think about, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. And then so we'll be talking about that later on today. I'm going to bring in Marie Yovanovitch and Bildt later on, but I can see there are two people who've been waving their hands furiously. First, back over there. Okay, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So that we can get everyone's comments in, as I say, please introduce yourself briefly and keep your comments short so we can get more voices in.
Thank you very much. My name is Erkin Gaderli. I'm member of the parliament in Azerbaijan, and also a member of the Azerbaijan delegation to the Parliament and the Council of Europe. I have two comments, one about Russia in general and Putin in particular. What I hear a lot and read a lot is that there is a great deal of personification and oversimplification about the Putin's personal role in this war. Of course, what Putin thinks and plans is important to know, but that's not enough. It's not just Putin. It's not that Putin single-handedly imposes his will upon the entire Russian nation. What Putin says and does, unfortunately, meets the expectations of the vast majority of the Russian population. And that makes it very difficult for Russia to find a face-saving exit from this situation. On the other hand, we have a situation where Ukraine has no right to give up. And this is a perfect right for Ukraine to have. We also know that Ukraine has a very high degree of what is called in military and political literature with regard to armed conflict, high degree of cost tolerance. And cost tolerance is the readiness and ability of people to sacrifice with a view to achieving their strategic goal. So that is why I join all those commentators who raised their concerns about the comments with regard to readiness of Ukraine, or the right of Ukraine, or what kind of peace it could be achieved and when. Peace as an absence of a war is not an option. It can be easily achieved, and it sometimes seems like the entire world expects Ukraine to give up so that the peace is established. That's not an option. Peace is important, but only with an element of justice. And in the case of the war of aggression and occupation, the justice must be restored only by means of restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for that powerful intervention, comment over there, and then we'll turn to Marie.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for assembling all of us here. Not first time, actually, but in this time of our decisions. It's decision making.
Do you want to briefly introduce yourself, sir?
Yes, I am Emanuel Zingeris. I am chairman of Lithuanian delegation, Lithuania, Vilnius, small country in the Baltic, to Labas, sveiki, to Council of Europe, and I'm so glad that we pushed immediately Russians out after 24th from membership, and I'm very glad that we declared first, our international organization had declared Russia like a terrorist regime, terrorist one. So from our point of view, we are here remembering our experience in the Baltic, in Finland. Mannerheim built his wall from the 20s, not reacting to Joseph Stalin remarks that he will be keeping peace forever. So it was in 26 building Mannerheim line, in 32, 36, until war broke and Stalin attacked Finland. We in the Baltic never become part of Soviet Union. It was not our reality. It was not us. It was their invasion to our country. Ukraine. I'm sorry to say, dear President and our friends, it was not answered in 2003. It was answered to our revolutions in the Baltic and in Solidarność in Poland in 1990. Mr. Putin not recognized the realities of 1990 changes. That was the basic point. He kept his anger inside of him for the 90s, after the coup of the 19th of August in 91, if you remember, coup in Moscow. That he was on the side of those guys who tried to make a coup against Yeltsin group. So from our point of view now is only one question. How are we building our realities is not about negotiations with Russia and not thinking where is the place of Russia. That's, Alex, it's not important for us how they will behave. If important is our fortifications and our winning the war. And after that, probably, we will have an idea about Russia. But when they cleaned Russia from all Democrats, Boris Nemtsov killed all Russian Democrats inside. They're under repression. So from our side, is with whom we should negotiate. Our business is to fortify Ukraine. That means, well, we in the Baltic and in Poland will be the next. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much indeed. I should say, as someone who started my career as a journalist, around the concrete blocks around the parliament in Vilnius. I remember speaking to my foreign editor at the Financial Times in London, literally as they were protesters around the concrete blocks, and my foreign editor telling me with great confidence, oh, the Lithuanians, they will never succeed. There's no chance of them of the Soviet Union breaking up and them succeeding. And they were completely wrong. So let's hope that that is repeated. I want to bring in both Marie and then Carl, and then go towards more audience questions. Marie, over to you. This is Marie Yovanovitch, who is a senior fellow of the Russian Eurasian program at the Carnegie Endowment.
And more relevantly, I was a former ambassador here to Ukraine.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay. I just want to say very briefly what an honor it is to be here in Ukraine with all of our Ukrainian friends. At this really important moment, and I'm really pleased to be here. I want to also agree with everybody who has said that Russia's war on Ukraine, and more broadly the West, started a long, long time ago. And Russia learned a lesson from that because we didn't push back hard enough. We didn't push back hard enough on the, all the different ways of that Russia was fighting against the West, and particularly Ukraine. And we didn't push back hard enough in Georgia in 2008. Russia got away with it. Russia got away with it in 2014, 2015, and continued for all these years. And I'm pleased to say Russia is not getting away with it now. But we need to provide as much support as we can in order to help our brave Ukrainian colleagues win this fight. And why do we need to do this? Not only is it a question of our common values, it's also a question of our common security, because Ukraine is fighting, Ukrainians are not only fighting for their own families, their own freedom, they are fighting for ours as well. And if we do not support Ukraine sufficiently, as was done in the past, we will need to confront Russia at some later time, that may be in a time that is not of our choosing and a place that is not to our advantage. And so we need to help Ukraine now with as much as possible. And so, of course, I'm very proud that President Biden was here this week showing support. And while I give the Biden administration a lot of high marks for the support that we have provided to Ukraine, I think that the slogan, if you will, of we will be there as long as it takes, we will provide support as long as it takes, needs to be updated a little bit. That we will provide as much as it takes, as quickly as possible, for Ukrainian victory. I think we need to be clear about that.
Thank you. Well, I think everybody would agree with you, Ambassador. I should say, in America, once you have a title, you never lose it. You are ambassador for life, and so I can call you ambassador. So. Okay, Your Excellency, yes. So thank you, Your Excellency. I think everyone in the room would strongly agree with that, and I would echo that very strongly indeed. Carl, I think you are down to say a few words, and then we'll come over on this side of the room to get some comments over here. I say we've got 10 minutes left, so to get as many comments as possible.
In Sweden, we don't have that tradition with titles, so I'm okay.
Okay.
No, just very briefly, 24th of February is going to redefine the future of Europe in much the same way as the 13th of November 1989. 13th of November 1989 played out over a prolonged period of time. 24th of February last year will play out over a prolonged period of time. We will not get peace back in Europe for quite some time. And I say that irrespectively of what happens with the kinetic conflict going on now, peace is a very, very elusive concept at the moment. And I would say there are two conditions for restoring peace in the east of Europe and in all of Europe. And those are really essential. The first one is obvious, and that is regime change in the Kremlin. That is not for us, that's for the Russians. But as long as Putin and his project is alive, there will not be peace in Europe. There could be a pause in the conflict, but there will not be peace. This will happen. I mean, there's no question. There's an end date to Putin. That date could be earlier, the one way or the other, or it could be later, but there is an end date. And there is something that's going to happen after that. The second precondition is, of course, the stabilization of Ukraine by its integration in the European Union and in the European security structures, be that membership of NATO or be that defined in some sort of other way. Sweden is not yet member of NATO. We hope to be that fairly soon, but that's to be defined. But it has to be a secured Ukraine that is integrated in the European and the Western structures. Until we have reached these two conditions, I don't think we will have proper peace. We might be able to end the acute conflict, but peace is far more than the absence of war. And much like the 30th of November 1989 played out over a fairly prolonged period of time, the 24th of February last year will play out over a fairly long period of time.
Absolutely, I see. Bob, I see you wanting to come in very quickly, and then I want to turn to, and then...
Yeah, just very briefly on a couple of points, so two things that have been raised. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, because I remember it, I've never trusted Western conventional wisdom talking about this part of the world as you yourself experienced. And it is breathtaking to the extent to which Western nations underestimated Ukrainian resolve to fight. And absolutely we should recognize that. And I think related to that, we are still not giving the amount of kit that is needed. And for me, that is a great regret, because the longer we are not giving the kit, the more difficult it becomes for Ukraine to win swiftly. And that is the most moral way to save life, both here and potentially in anything that could happen in future. And finally, on what Carl was saying, we're not going to have normal, regardless of what happens in this war, provided Putin survives and provided you have some kind of mini Putin afterwards, I'm afraid to say that we will not have a normalized European situation for at least a decade, if not longer. And I'm afraid to say that is something else that we've got to face, because there's something like magical thinking happening in some European capitals. And indeed, the Archbishop of Canterbury, unfortunately, yesterday embarrassed himself again by thinking that Ukraine can win without Russia losing. And because this is a battlefield war, for Ukraine to win, Russia has to lose on the battlefield. And I think some people still don't realize that.
Right, absolutely. I see we've got 3 comments. We've got 1 over there and then 2 over here. So why don't you quickly go first? I know you've been waving a lot at me, and then over there, and then the lady at the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Bilak. I was born in a small western Ukrainian village called Toronto. I've been living in Ukraine for 30 years, and I joined the Territorial Defense Forces in Boryspil region in January of last year. I've never been worried about Ukraine's resolve. I've never been worried about its ability to fight. Throughout this entire war, I've been worried about being thrown under the bus by our Western allies. And it has been a constant concern of mine. And this fetishism that so-called Western experts, present company accepted, have over Russia translates into Ukraine. You project your fears of Russia onto Ukraine. Nobody knows anything about Ukraine. They're all Russian experts, but somehow that qualifies them to think about what's best for Ukraine. And when you project about, your fears of escalations, etc., you are enabling Putin. You are enabling him to double down and say they are weak, we can move forward, we can divide them, they don't have the resolve to continue. And this is moral hazard. When I train with my battalion and with my unit, I don't hear a single word over the past year about defeat, about surrender. I only hear about fighting and dying, because it's better to stand on your feet and die a free man than to live on your knees a slave. And I think this is something that people don't appreciate in the West, because we're afraid. We're entitled in the West. Freedom is something that we just inherit and that the government guarantees us. Freedom's not free, and I think Ukrainians have shown that. And the fundamental problem right now is the moral hazard around fear of escalation, slowing down the kit, everything that Mr. Danilov and the Vice Prime Minister have talked about have been on the wish list since at least June of last year. And until we start to get that, until we are going to continue to be dying in Bakhmut, Soledar, Vuhledar, and other places. And this is a moral problem, because if we don't have moral clarity, if you don't have moral clarity around this issue, you will carry, and your policymakers, not you of course, but the policymakers in your countries will carry moral culpability for the consequences. We are dying every single day because we don't have enough ammunition, we don't have enough rockets, we don't have enough tanks, we don't have enough infantry fighting vehicles, etc., etc., etc.
Right.
We can only get them from you. So this is a plea to the policy, the influencers, the very important people in this audience, to change the mindset. It's not about more kit. It's about changing the mindset from we're worried about escalation to, as General Ben Hodges says, you got to be in it to win it. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Well, I think one of the aims of today's discussion is precisely to convey that message to the West. We have 3 people who are slated to speak now, and we've only got 4 minutes, so I will have to ask everyone to be very brief. First, I'd like to call on Luke Harding, who's the Chief International Correspondent of The Guardian. Then I think we'd like to hear a few words from Volodymyr Yermolenko, and then I think there is a lady at the back who's been patiently trying to get in. So, Luke.
Sorry, I'm
Oh, sorry, Luke.
Yeah,
sorry.
that's all right. Yeah, I just want to follow up very briefly from Marie, Your Excellency's comments about Putin getting away with it. I spent 4 years in Moscow as the Guardian's bureau chief there, and for a long time, those of us who warned that the regime was not merely domestically repressive, but also internationally reckless and adventurous, were kind of criticized as being hysterical and neocons and so on. And I would just make 2 pleas. One, that we use precise terms about what's going on here. I was here a year ago. I've been around the front line this week, and it seems to me that what's going on is Russian fascism. I think we shouldn't be shy about using that word, but this is our kind of 1930s moment as Europe and as a community. And the other thing I would just say is, it's interesting listening to Nataliya that we've had brilliant storytelling from Ukraine. It has to continue. Journalists, the president, civil society. We need to tell good stories, true stories, powerful stories to keep everybody on board.
Absolutely. As a journalist, I would strongly agree. Volodymyr Yermolenko.
Just a few words first about emotion. We probably recognized here how emotional Ukrainian speakers are. And it is sometimes judged abroad as a being underdog. You know, when you're emotional, you can't really think, etc. But I would like to say that it is emotions which are running history, which are moving history. You cannot not be emotional when you talk to a parent who lost her child. I did it several times here during this war. And afterwards, of course, you cannot be not being emotional. It's emotions who made the 1989. It's emotions who made all those revolutions in history that we are talking about. And these emotions, I think, it is very important that we understand that it is thanks to these emotions that Ukrainians are now moving history. And the second thing I would like to stress is that we began this discussion with the topic about exhausting, how Russia can exhaust Ukraine. But we are now in the situation that we together are exhausting Russia. We are speaking right now from that force that we have, not only moral force, but also economic force and military force. And I sometimes really astonished how the West still uses this language of weakness. You know, President Zelensky talked on Munich Security Conference about David against Goliath. Sometimes I feel that the West perceives himself also a weaker part of the equation. It is not. And Ukraine, I think, shows right now that democracy is strong. And I think it's very important to remember that.
Thank you. Well, I think that's very well said indeed. We are pretty much out of time, but there are just two people who've very patiently been waving their hands, so you literally have less than a minute to share your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Then I'll keep it very tight. My name is Jessica Berlin. I'm a foreign policy analyst from Germany and the United States. And I wanted to come back on Olga's comment around the world being changed by Ukraine already now and victory in the future. As a Western European and as an American, there's an uncomfortable truth we need to acknowledge. There are many people in our countries and in our politics who do not want this world to change because they helped shape the situation we're in. And I'll pick on Germany because it's my country, but France, the UK, the US all have a similar problem. We have firstly financed Russian fascism for 20 years. We allowed this to happen, and we allowed 8 years of war to escalate into the situation we have today. And secondly, we are also allowing, as we speak, Russian and including also Chinese, Saudi, etc. money to influence our elections, to buy politicians and media. It's not a secret. We know this is happening. But again, to pick on Germany, it's very clear both the SPD and the CDU do not have an interest. They have a literal against interest to make sure the truth does not come to light of how we got here. And so for these forces in our countries that are indeed mainstream, that don't want the truth to come to light, this is where first priority, and first 10 priorities, Ukrainian victory, Ukrainian victory, Ukrainian victory. But when this war is won, we will need to have a reckoning with ourselves. We will need to change ourselves and our political systems, because we are also in the process right now of making the same mistake with China that we have allowed to happen with Russia.
Thank you. And I would urge you to keep speaking out loudly and saying that very loudly in Germany as well, because that needs to be said very, very loudly over and over again. Very last quick comment, because you have been waving at me from the very beginning.
It's difficult to be very short. I am on such conferences since 2004. So next year it's going to be 20 years. I'm present on such discussion. And we should not make it like it usually. We should not be politically correct and polite. That is why the speech of Oleksiy Danilov was the most powerful and interesting. And I would confirm that what he said, that in 2007 he said about the possible occupation of Crimea and the Donbass. Second, Oleksiy raised the really painful topic for the West, which it's elephant in the room. You don't like to discuss about future of Russia and possible collapse of Russia as the biggest fear of the West. as it happened in 1991 when collapse of Soviet Union was the biggest fear of the West, when American president was in Kyiv and calling not to stop Soviet Union to exist. So we should not avoid difficult topics, and we should not be politically polite. And what is really important to discuss today is to stop circulating the same thoughts around us, which we heard many times, but to discuss how many fighter jet Ukraine needs, who should produce this fighter jet, when we start producing this fighter jet to get them on the front line in proper time, how many tanks Ukraine needs, when they should be delivered, when we can use this. If they're too late, we don't need them. The same with artillery, the same with ammunition, and so on and so forth. Because if we have traditional discussions, as it happened every year, there is no real sense in it. That is why I call to have it not polite, and I appreciate Victor who called us for informal discussion. We should not do this as usually, at least not today. Thank you.
Thank you. We are over time, but I can see that Oleksiy wants to come in, and so I think we should certainly give you the floor.
I would like to say to draw your attention to the fact that time is running out. Our time is just beginning. I'm talking about Ukraine. We will prove everyone what Ukraine is. We have a lot of work to do after our victory. We have to put our home to order. And of course, a lot of events that were happening between 1991 to 2022, we should take them into account. And there's usually a divide in many governments of the world. There are doves who live in their neatness, and there are hawks. And as experience shows, the decisions that are taken by the decisions, then the hawks have a lot of effort to put these things right. I may quote the experience of 1953 when they arrived at a decision about parallel 38, when the doves were accepting this decision, and I would not like this happen in our country. And I would like the hawks who fly much higher and see more to prevail, to be strong. And I believe that our falcons who are flying our skies, as far as our defense and our country are concerned, will do everything for the victory to be ours. But this will transpire possible only if we have common values, publicly and otherwise.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that seems like a good note or message to end this panel on. We are slightly over time, but I'd just like to say a very big thank you to all of you for commenting. Thank you to the audience for commenting as well.